The Cleveland Browns look to keep the momentum going against one of the toughest competitors they've faced over the last few years in Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens joins us now on your latest Locked On Browns, which starts now.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns face off in an important Week 4 divisional matchup. I'm Kevin Oestreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens. He is Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, with another episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns your first listen each and every day. As always, are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That's also in video form over on YouTube. And today's episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. And Jeff, we got two teams atop the AFC North, and the Ravens and the Browns, both 2-1. This is a key point in the season already. It's only Week 4, but I think both teams have been trying to prove themselves, and now a head-to-head clash. Two very good defenses. Cleveland's obviously being the best in the league right now in multiple facets. Both offenses trying to show some stuff as well. I mean, I'm excited for this one because I think it's going to be a great divisional matchup.
Well, you look at the AFC North overall. Obviously, one game separates the four teams at this point. I think that's pretty much kind of what everybody expected. It was going to be kind of tight up until this point. For the Browns, it's just really, it's been all about the defense. And, the way you look at the numbers and, the Browns are giving up 10. No, the Browns defense is giving up 6 points a game. They've given up 18 points through 3 games. This unit has been ridiculously good to this point. Defense coordinator Jim Schwartz, when he got here, there were a lot of questions asked. The Browns had coverage gaffes in years past under the Joe Woods regime. And he said, well, from what I see some guys that I'm just going to let go out there and basically do their thing, and we're going to play man-to-man coverage. But a lot of what Jim Schwartz believes is I can make my secondary look great, because if I have the defensive lineman I want, my secondary most likely is not going to be a factor. And through 3 weeks, that has been just the case. Joe Burrow in Week 1 obviously was not able to get anything going. Week 2, other than a big little coverage lapse, obviously George Pickens had a big 72-yard touchdown. Last week, same thing for Ryan Tannehill, whether it was getting harassed by the defensive lineman or Myles Garrett just driving Andre Dillard right into Ryan Tannehill's lap. There was nothing he could get going. So it's been really, really fun to watch, and it's just the lengths that they can go and the things they can do now. Myles Garrett, everybody always thought, hey, you could just move him here. There's so much you could do with him. But the point is if you don't have other guys who can win on one-on-ones, and this was the case for years, it doesn't matter what you do with Myles Garrett, because if you commit 2 to 3 people, but now, okay, so you put Zadarius Smith over a left tackle, you put Ogbo Okoronkwo over a right tackle, and Myles Garrett basically says, I'm going to pick the weakest link and shoot that gap. It's, it's a fun concept to have when you have this type of talent that they do right now. And the secondary obviously has played lights out. Denzel Ward's been outstanding. A lot of people talk 2022 was maybe a down year for him. He did miss some time, late in the summer, had some people nervous, and why he was even playing. Why is he playing? Because he had a down year in 2022, and he wanted to make sure he was ready to go, and he's been fantastic. Newsome, Emerson, good. The safety's been fantastic. Thornhill, obviously Grant Delpit, one of the best safeties in the NFL right now. The McLeod signing was a great, great addition to bring a veteran presence in here, familiar with Jim Schwartz's system. The linebackers, same linebackers as last year. They're playing a lot better this year. You want to know why? Because they're kept clean. It's very, very simple. As long as you keep your linebackers clean, it's a lot easier to run around and make tackles and make plays, and that's what they've been able to do this point. Offensively, the biggest storyline, and this is where the misconception came in. This is, and Kev, we did a AFC North show. Everybody with the just assuming Deshaun Watson. I never thought it was a question of, if Deshaun Watson was going to return. My question was when. And with the chips down, number one, the loss against Monday Night Football against Pittsburgh, and factoring in now you got to go play your next game and you don't have Nick Chubb anymore. It was like, wow, this is basically put up or shut up time. And he went out there, had his best game, obviously as quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, 27-33, nearly 300 yards, a dagger, 43-yard touchdown late in the game, basically to seal this, game that was, getting away from the Tennessee Titans already. I think for Deshaun, this is the moment where it's just going to go back to being what he was. And whether or not he becomes a top 5 quarterback again, I don't think the Cleveland Browns essentially even need him to, the way this defense is playing. And they play well on special teams. Obviously, their kicker situation is now straightened out. I think for him mentally now, it's okay. It's a woosah moment. I'm good. I'm back in the groove here. This is my team now. This is my offensive system now. These are my skill players now, and everything's just flowing much better. Obviously, there's big games coming. Baltimore this week, then they go to the bye, and then they got San Francisco. So much was made about this Browns beginning schedule, this first 5. And look, possibility to go 3-1, possibility to go 3-2 over this 5-game stretch. That would be really, really huge for this franchise, which is going to get some easier games coming down the schedule afterwards.
Yeah, and for the Ravens, a quick little overview of what's happened for them so far. Week 1 was the Texans. They a little bit of an iffy first half, 7-6 Ravens at halftime there, but the offense made adjustments, figured it out. Week 2 was that Bengals game where they go into Cincinnati with a bunch of guys hurt. They lose Odell Beckham Jr. mid-game, and they pull out a big win against the Bengals offense that just hasn't really looked right so far through 3 weeks. And then that Colts game was the big disappointment, where it was a game the Ravens probably should have won, but 4 straight drives in the late first to a whole second quarter with 4 fumbles. That can't happen. They miscommunicated with Zay Flowers on a 2-point, or not on a 2-point, but on a onside kick where, like the free kick after a safety, and the Ravens end up, really having to figure out how to grind out a game they should have been in a position to win much easier than they did. But, the refs end up blowing a couple calls, and we don't use referees as an excuse. They shouldn't have let the game get to that point in the first place. But the Ravens could be 3-0 right now, but the fact is they didn't play enough to be 3-0. So they're 2-1 and now in a position with Cleveland in this game. But I think when you talk about a big storyline, Jeff, for the Ravens, it has to be injuries. And we've seemingly, for all of this, for 4 years, we've been talking about the Ravens and how injured they are. Combined between the practice squad injury report coming out on Wednesday, injured reserve, and the NFI list, they have 21 players on there. And it's week 4. We are not even a month into the season yet, and we're already back to where we were with the Ravens and their injury woes from last year, from 2 years ago, from 3 years ago. Guys like Ronnie Stanley, Tyler Linderbaum, Odell Beckham, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Williams, J.K. Dobbins, Odell. There's so much that's being left out of the field right now. Now, there were a couple of positives from practice on Wednesday. Marcus Williams comes back, Ronnie Stanley, Tyler Linderbaum, and Gus Edwards all came back. I don't know if that means they're all going to play this week. There might be some ramp up period. I mean, getting Ronnie Stanley back would be huge against Myles Garrett. And, who knows where Garrett lines up. I don't know if Baltimore's going to have 2 tight ends following him all across the field like the Titans did in that game. But regardless, having Stanley back would be huge. Maybe Marlon Humphrey comes back from his foot injury. This is kind of around the time people expected him to come back. He'd be big to have against Amari Cooper and some of those Browns' other wide receivers. But the fact that we're already here is, I think, disheartening for a lot of people, because seemingly for the 4th straight season, there's been so much potential around this Baltimore team. Not that they don't have potential right now, but at this point, these injuries, at least the silver lining is that not a lot of them are season ending. J.K. Dobbins tears the Achilles. He's down for the season. But other than that, you're expected to get a lot of these guys back, whether it's in the next couple of days, couple of weeks. It's not like they're going to be out for a couple of months or the whole season. So that, at least for me, is the silver lining, but that has to be the biggest storyline. But what about Cleveland, Jeff? What's their injury situation looking like?
Well, I mean, the Browns right now are going with a smart approach. Like Joe Bitonio, it's to the point now where Joe Bitonio doesn't practice on Wednesdays anymore. And God bless him. Obviously, 10 years in the league, the guy deserves it. As far as, guys missing, I mean, Kareem Hunt was banged up. Obviously, you take your first hits in, 9.5 months. It makes sense. Your first football game, you're going to, obviously not come out for practice on Wednesday. But, look, everybody knows Nick Chubb, and news obviously got exponentially better last Saturday, where they believe it's only an MCL, which I got to be honest, I'm going to wait till everything I hear after surgery, because it blows my mind that it could possibly just be an MCL. It's still, but obviously Nick was such an important part of this team. And this is where it's going to be interesting, obviously, because health-wise, they're in a really, really good spot. Greg Newsome missed last week, but he was back at practice today. Siaki Ika's back at practice. He's just not been to the point where they're ready to activate him for game day yet. This is the embarrassment of riches the Cleveland Browns have right now on the defensive line. But the thing, and what seemed to work well on Sunday for the Browns is a rallying cry for Nick Chubb. When you have a guy like that who is such a dedicated worker, and basically just stands up basically for the company and the team every single week, he's missing, it has guys go the extra mile. It has guys give a little bit more. And, that's what we've gotten to see at least through 1 week without Nick Chubb. As far as the on-field product, I mean, it's still going to remain to be seen what exactly they do here, because this was a team that had 20 to 25 touches per week figured in for Nick Chubb. There's plenty of skill still here, but you're going to do different things. Like I'm sure the Tennessee Titans spent all week getting ready to watch Jerome Ford, the former high school wide receiver, line up as a wide receiver, run a sluggo and wide open in the end zone, and everybody on Tennessee like, well, that wasn't in the scouting report.
Yeah, and I think that with the Ravens and the Browns in this game in particular, I think guys are going to have to step up. Maybe these unheralded heroes and unheralded players that maybe weren't expected to get all these touches early in the season, but injury is an opportunity. We'll have it be that way. And coming up in the second part of the show here on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns, we'll be getting into the biggest matchups for both Baltimore and Cleveland. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to get to on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. But first, this episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns is brought to you by Harry's. And there are so many people you could shave for, whether it's yourself, your partner, your kids. A great shave can make you feel great too, confident, clean, young. I mean, I don't have too much going on right now, facial hair wise. I see Jeff's got a little something going on there with the facial hair, but with Harry's, the Harry's trial set is great because the packaging is great, the razor is awesome, and the quality of the shave, you can't get better than Harry's. The starter set is a $13 value for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. It includes a 5-blade German-engineered razor, weighted handle, foaming shave gel, and a travel cover. You can schedule delivery for refills as low as $2, half what you pay for the other blades. And Harry's makes the skincare products that will give you the best shave ever. So creams, washes, lotions that'll keep your skin healthy and hydrated. Also blades made in their own factory in Germany that stay sharp. And guys who've tried it, they say their 8th shave is pretty much as sharp as their first. They have sleek, weighted handles that look great in your bathroom and give you precise control with each wipe. And there's no reason not to try Harry's. Harry's has the highest customer satisfaction in the shaving industry, and they're still offering a no-risk trial. Don't like your shave? No worries. It's on them. Get your best shave ever this summer with Harry's razors and skincare products. Get a $13 starter set for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. That's harrys.com/NFL for a $3 starter set. We're back here, Locked On Ravens, Locked On Browns. Kevin Oestreicher, Jeff Lloyd still talking with you. Big divisional week 4 matchup for the Ravens and the Browns, both at 2-1 and looking to take sole possession, or at least part of it, depending on what happens with Pittsburgh, possession of first place in the AFC North. And the biggest matchups, there are a bunch of them, Jeff. For me, I think I'll start and say Myles Garrett versus this Baltimore offensive line. The Browns front, honestly, versus the Ravens offensive line, which I think, we kind of talked about it off air a little bit and during the show already. I thought Andrew Berry and the Browns staff did a great job of getting this Browns front to where it needed to be in the offseason. Not only do you now have Myles Garrett, who's been the best at his position and one of the best defensive players in the NFL for years now, but you bring in Zadarius Smith, who's an old friend over here in Baltimore. You also have the Dalvin Tomlinson addition, the Shelby Harris, and getting these guys in position to, Okoronkwo has been great for them too. You have to be able to have depth and quality, and the Browns now have both that on the front. Now the Ravens, depending on who they get back on their offensive line, if Ronnie Stanley comes back, great. Tyler Linderbaum comes back, great. Sam Mustipher is a replacement for Linderbaum. Has actually been pretty solid compared to what he was in Chicago, and maybe that's just he got out of Chicago, and that's all it really took. But then you also have Patrick McCary, who I think it might have been Myles Garrett who called him one of the best tackles in the NFL a couple of years ago when I think McCary was filling in at right guard. I can't remember if it was Garrett or not, but I think somebody said that. And he's proven to be a pretty fine replacement option for Stanley. Now, obviously, Stanley, you want him out there, and Linderbaum, you want him out there. But against this Browns front, the key is to keep Lamar Jackson upright, keep him in the pocket throwing that football. And I know a lot's been made about, hey, teams trying to find these defensive Lamar Jackson stoppers. I mean, for a lot of people, JOK in Cleveland has been, this is the matchup that you put out there, and he's the guy that, can match Lamar. And I don't think anybody can, quote unquote, match Lamar, but you can put a guy out there who has speed and can make life a little more difficult for him. And I think Cleveland's defense, if they can get pressure on Lamar Jackson, Lamar's always going to escape. There are going to be plays there on any game where he is. I mean, obviously the Cleveland game a couple years ago, remember that ugly game where Lamar escapes, throws the ball to Mark Andrews, Clowney slams his helmet, Garrett shakes his hand. You're always going to have that. But there are going to be plays where if the pressure just keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming, we saw against the Colts, Lamar had some trouble when Gus Bradley started to blitz him. Throws started to go behind receivers a little bit. So I think the Ravens offensive line picking up blockers, identifying blitzes, And for Lamar Jackson making the right decision when the pressure comes or Garrett beats his guy, that to me is huge.
This is one of the things actually I talked about when we did the crossover, with Jake from the Locked On Bengals show. This might not be the best week to come back, and that's what I kind of said to him about Joe Burrow. This might not be the best week to come back for these guys. Look, even if they come back, they're not going to be 100%. And look, very few players take the field in an NFL game at 100%. But this Browns defensive line right now, and the Browns will go wherever they think the weak link is. Last week they were taking their defensive ends and they went right after the Tennessee Titans on the left-hand side. And there were times where it was, Garrett lined up on the guard, was Darius Smith on the outside, Garrett on the outside, open up, and they continue to mix up their looks. And the problem with doing that is everybody kind of gets tired, because the more defensive ends and basically edge players you can get on the field, you can take the pounding of going, 300 pounds on 300 pounds. When you're, 315 trying to chase a guy that's 275, it just creates, really, really difficult times. And this has kind of been the case of what's going on here. Marlon Humphrey coming back. Look, if he wants to take another week, I'd be happy with that, because he's always kind of been a thorn in this team's side. But that's also, now the thing with Lamar is, now you're bringing up JOK. This has kind of been something new now, and we've been screaming about this for years. With the Browns, with Grant Delpit, everybody thinks great safeties, and they think safety on the roof. That has never been what made Grant Delpit a great player at LSU and where he shined. And obviously, I know you've seen it, and obviously there's been some good Grant Delpit games. There was it 4 drives in a row a couple of years ago where it was interception, back and forth between Lamar and Baker. Obviously, Grant Delpit was a big part of that. The Browns now, in nickel and even dime situations, Grant Delpit's taking linebacker reps. His interception on Monday Night Football against Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett looked at him and said, all right, he's going to drop with Fryermouth. He did. He took the flat. Kenny Pickett threw it. Grant Delpit baited him in a throw and the interception. They are taking what they think their players do best and having them do that. In Joe Woods' system, they were taking players and saying, well, you're going to do this. John Johnson III was a great player in his time with the Los Angeles Rams. The only time he was ever good for the Cleveland Browns is when they got creative with him. They tried to make him a traditional free safety. He wasn't athletic enough. It didn't work. This is not something Jim Schwartz is going to do. He's going to look at a player and say, he's good at this, he's good at this, he's good at this. He's never going to do, like, if you give the 3 negatives, it doesn't matter, because they're not going to ask those players to do those things, which is what you do. If you want players to be successful, play to their strengths, obviously not to their weaknesses. The thing is, it's going to be weird, because I think the Ravens are probably going to be more what the Browns are used to, probably at least this week, than maybe before the second time they meet, because I think we're in this weird spot where it's going to be the Lamar show. You're not going to get to see what Lamar did against the Bengals, because, even with the Browns offensive line, you don't want Lamar sitting back there all day, trying to make it rain like he did in Cincinnati. And for those who didn't realize Lamar Jackson could throw like he did, you're all a bunch of fools. That's what he did in Louisville. That's just what Baltimore didn't do with him early in his career. He is a traditional quarterback. He can do all of those things. But I think they're in a tight spot right now where the running game maybe isn't what they were hoping it was going to be, obviously, this year, where it's got to kind of all be on Lamar again. And is he capable of it? Sure, we all know it. We've all seen it. We're talking about a former league MVP here. But this was not supposed to be the Ravens that we were talking about. It was supposed to be more of, Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, Bateman. But with all these injuries, it comes back onto it. And for me, when we talk about these matchups, it'll always be Lamar. But the second one I will always bring up, and I'll forever bring up, is Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews basically has an all-pro Hall of Fame resume playing against the Cleveland Browns. He has decimated his team too many times that I can even continue to talk about. He's always the biggest threat for me when we played them all offensively besides Lamar, because it's just been there. And you know what's coming. It's nothing different. It's either going to be a short seam or it's going to be a deep seam. And he has made a living on it against the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns have not been tested much by any tight end yet to this point. So this is one thing that maybe, I'm not saying it could be a weakness, but we don't know if it's a positive or we don't know if it's a weakness. Have they changed their ability to shut down tight ends, because they have not faced one yet to this point? So that's one I'm always concerned about. Roquan Smith and the Ravens defensive line, I don't know what to make of the Browns running game right now. Obviously, look, we're one game in post Nick Chubb for the rest of 2023. Obviously, Nick will not be here. Where exactly are they as far as what they think Jerome known for does best, where we know what Kareem does best, obviously. They do have this new element of Pierre Strong. They haven't really had a running back in the backfield that runs a 4-3 flat. So this is a guy they can try to find a way to get him a toss play in the open space and just let the Jets go. But, as far as that, the Ravens have been pretty good. Last year notwithstanding, Nick Chubb had over 90 yards both of those games, but he won't be playing. But it's going to be interesting. The Browns are going to have to run the ball somewhat here to keep teams honest, but we really have no idea what that's going to look like just yet.
Right. And I know that in this game in particular, another thing I'm interested to see is, if Odell can't play in this one, Rashad Bateman didn't practice on Wednesday too. So if those two guys can't go, then Zay Flowers, who I think already has established himself as Baltimore's number one when he's healthy, when everybody's healthy, which is crazy because, he's playing.
He was the number one receiver the second they drafted him.
Oh, I think that, with Beckham and Bateman and all these guys, it gave you the depth that you didn't have last season. And so even with Beckham and Bateman potentially down, Flowers he's been great. Nelson Aguilar's been actually not bad. He's been actually a pretty solid addition for them. But then after that, you're kind of wondering, all right, where are the other people? Devin Duvernay is still there. He can maybe make a play or two, maybe even in the running game. But to me, it's how does Cleveland defend Zay Flowers, which I think is super interesting. And that's part of what we'll get to in the key prediction segment coming up in the final part of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. So don't go anywhere. Still a bunch to talk about here on both shows. But first, this episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns is brought to you by Prize Picks. And if you're looking for daily fantasy sports, look no further than Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the most fun so many people have had, winning up to 25 times their money this football season. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on the projected stats, and place your entry. They have quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, an enormous selection of players and stat types. That's what makes Prize Picks the number one daily fantasy sports app. And this week over on Prize Picks for the Ravens and Browns, maybe a project Lamar Jackson to go for more than his projected yard total. Maybe for the Browns, Amari Cooper, if Marlon Humphrey doesn't play, maybe you have him go for more than his projected touchdown total. I don't know. Defensively, though, it could be a little bit of a slugfest depending on what happens. So maybe you go for less than the point amount. But Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. And Prize Picks now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this football season. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens, Locked On Browns. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Jeff Lloyd, breaking down this Ravens and Browns big matchup. Again, this, we could look back on this one, Jeff, by the time December, January rolls around, and we might say, man, if only the Ravens won this one, or if only the Browns won this one. It was such a big game. And especially for divisional matchups, where I think divisional record will have such a big impact this year, because as we talked about at the top of the show, all 4 teams could potentially make the playoffs. I think it's that kind of division this year. But when looking at predictions for this one, I want to start by looking at what each team has to do right in order to win this game. So from Cleveland's perspective, what do they have to do in order to make sure they can secure a win here in week 4?
Well, I mean, obviously defensively, it's basically just keep the line moving here. And the thing that's been so crazy about this is I don't think anybody thought any defense would come out of the box this quickly with all the newness they had. So yes, there's going to be bumps in the road, and they're going to take a couple shots to the chin here. But you would think there's still the possibility of some improvement, which is crazy to say. But they've only played together 3 games. But obviously just keep the line moving. And, look, Lamar is going to be, the toughest test to this point, obviously the most mobile quarterback they've seen to this point. And there's still that, hey, and he still is Lamar Jackson. It's a brand name that has not changed, obviously, for them. Offensively, it's 27-33 last week for Deshaun Watson. That is efficient football. This offense does not have to play like a top 5 offense. The defense right now is doing so much foundational work for this team that they don't have to play lights out on offense. They have to be efficient. They have to be smart. And they have 6 turnovers offensively through 3 games. That is not a sustainable pace. Obviously, granted, 4 of those were 1 game in the loss. And as far as, your comment there before, the Ravens already have a letdown game that they lost. The Browns already have a letdown game that they lost. No team wants a second one. You don't want a second one, obviously. So this is a difficult spot for both teams with that. So continuing on offenses, look, Amari Cooper's been cooking right now. But the thing is, it's really efficient. They don't have to feature him for 12 targets. He's had 7 receptions both the last games. They're not featuring him with 12, 13 targets. They're getting everybody else involved, and the coverage gets lapsed. and they take their shots. Okay, we got a one-on-one. It's Amari Cooper. Against last week it was against Christian Fulton returning off injury. Guess what? Those were great matchups because obviously we knew Amari was 100. We knew Christian Fulton probably was not 100%. But they featured the wide receivers more last week. Obviously 5 receptions for Elijah Moore, 3 receptions for Donovan Peoples-Jones, a player had that not been getting involved. One to watch will be David Njoku. It's been really, really quiet for David Njoku thus far this season. The first game last year, 7 for 71 against the Ravens. So he's had some good games against the Ravens in his career. So they need to start just keeping the Browns have to use everybody on offense, because if they can continue to use everybody, you're keeping the defense honest. We've seen many times where the Ravens it was like, all right, we're going to take Nick Chubb away and you got to beat us with everything else. And the Browns weren't able to do that. This is the only advantage really the Browns get if no Nick Chubb is you can't key on anything essentially, because nobody's getting anywhere 20 to 25 opportunities for the Browns. So you have to be really balanced. And as far as the Ravens defense, you have to maintain your eyes on everybody because everybody is capable of performing. But the problem is you can't just say, we know it's been 5-6 plays, 24 is getting the ball here any second. It's not going to be like that anymore with the Browns. So, and for Deshaun, to his credit, and what he was really good at last week is what Baker Mayfield in his prime with the Browns was good at under Coach Stefanski. It doesn't matter who you are. Just find the open guy. Most likely somebody's going to be open. Just take what the defense gives you. Keep the line moving, keep the chains moving, and that's how you beat good football teams.
And for me, I think one of the sneaky things about this game, Jeff, is that we have the number 1 and number 2 rated pass defenses going up against each other. Cleveland is there at number 1. Baltimore is tied for 2 with no Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Williams, which makes it, I think, even more impressive. Baltimore's even in that spot. But for me, what the Ravens have to do in order to win this game is just be less sloppy. And I think with the Ravens, stuff that's happened with them sloppy-wise, it's been different. Like in week 1 against the Texans, they had 13 penalties. And that's like an absurd number. It was, I think, tied for 7th in team history. Week 2 was a little better against Cincinnati, where there were still some penalties, but it wasn't nearly as bad. And then week 3, they only had 1 penalty for 5 yards. And you think, okay, well, an NFL team has 1 penalty for 5 yards, and like that's a clean game. But again, it was the 4 fumbles and 4 offensive possessions, some bad decisions by Lamar Jackson, the coaching staff, and more. So I think at this point for the Ravens, if you can just stop getting yourself into these self-inflicted wound situations and give yourself more of a shot, that to me, I think is where you start. Obviously, Cleveland is a much better team than the Colts. The Colts defense, I think, is, underrated, but Cleveland is here. Like Cleveland's defense is here. They've established themselves and they're the best defense in the league right now. And I know, Roquan Smith had some comments about, it's only 3 weeks. No defense can be number 1. But look, through 3 weeks, I think Cleveland has established themselves as that defense. So Baltimore's defense is really good in its own right. I'm not trying to discount what they've done so far. Their run defense, had a couple of lapses against Zach Moss and that Colts offense. So again, against Jerome Ford, if Kareem Hunt's able to suit up and play in this game, you can't let them have those 20-yard bounce runs to the outside. You have to be able to get there and stop those runs there and essentially make the Browns offense one-dimensional. And then again, as I kind of talk about offensively, for the Ravens, it's stopping Myles Garrett and just, I think, getting in a rhythm early, which is not easy against what the Browns have been able to do this year. As you mentioned, 6 points per game is very, very, very daunting when it comes to the Ravens. But Gus Edwards hopefully will be able to be back in this one. He exited the Colts game with concussion protocol, but practiced in full on Wednesday. So that at least is a very good sign that he's not concussed. If he isn't able to play for some reason and Justice Hill isn't able to play, you're looking at a backfield that goes from J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, and Justice Hill to Melvin Gordon and Kenyon Drake, which I think is a top 5 back room to a worst in the league back room. So that's going to be very important. But Gus Edwards is a career 5 yards per carry guy. I'm excited to see how it ends up playing out for the Ravens. But all right, let's get to predictions, final scores. Jeff, who do you have winning this one and why?
I just think things are going really, really well for the Cleveland Browns right now. Obviously the advantage of playing this one at home, coming off the momentum of a huge, huge victory against Tennessee at home after the loss in Nick Chubb, basically circling the wagons, getting to see the best of Deshaun Watson in a Cleveland Browns uniform. I think the momentum continues to grow here. The Browns get to go into the bye week, and then obviously have to face one of the toughest teams in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers, in week 6. I think they're going to continue the momentum here. Look, I think it's going to be a closer ballgame than their first 2 wins, obviously Cincinnati and Tennessee. I think maybe some 23-16, 24-16. I just think the Browns really have a really, really good, momentum going here. And even if the Ravens basically are going to get some guys here back, again, I just think it's for Ronnie Stanley to come back this week, for Lindenbaum to come back this week. Nobody wants to come back. You usually want to come back basically, against some soft toss. You know what I'm saying? A little batting practice. You're coming back against a defense right now that's just playing out of their mind. And, it might be a really, really difficult spot for those guys to come back to. And again, even if, maybe you get Gus Edwards, but maybe, with Beckham and Bateman, if they aren't even on the field yet, and we're talking about a hamstring and an ankle, you really question whether or not those guys are going to be able to go Sunday. And if that's the case, look, I love Zay Flowers. I think he's going to be a fantastic receiver. But Denzel Ward's a good matchup against him. Martin Emerson can bully him. Greg Newsome has been great in the slot. So wherever you're going to put him, he's going to face he's going to be the number one guy, and he's going to face a top corner wherever you line him up, whether it's left, whether it's right, or in the slot. So, it does make for tough sledding for Baltimore. But then again, number 8 is still the show. He's still a star in this game. And when he's on the field, he's capable of beating any team in the NFL. But I think the Browns handle this one.
For me, it's tough because Cleveland's playing so well defensively. The Ravens are still trying to figure things out on the offensive side of the ball, especially with a new system under another former Browns old friend in Todd Monken. So it's difficult to say, well, yeah, the Ravens are going to go out there and put up 30 on this Browns defense. I do not think that happens. I think what it's going to be is more of a grind it out, slug it out, AFC North defensive matchup game where it's going to come down to a player too late. When it comes down to a player too late, I'm going to believe the Ravens aren't going to have these massive, multiple self-inflicted wounds. And I'll say it comes down to a Justin Tucker field goal. I'll say 20-19 Ravens at the end of the day. But regardless, I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be an exciting game and could have really big implications coming down the line in the season. Again, we could look back in this week 4 matchup and say, well, man, the Ravens really could have won that one, or the Browns really could have won that one. But either way, I both teams have paths to winning, but obviously at this point, one team can come out on top unless there's a tie, and I cannot stand ties. So hopefully we don't go that route. But for Ravens and Browns, I think it'll be an exciting game. But that's all we have, both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. Jeff, I appreciate you as always giving the Browns insight, and I obviously tried my best to give the Ravens insight from over on this side. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the weeks both on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns with team-specific content, of course. So be sure to stay tuned for both those shows. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on